Hey guys, this is going to be a review of the core sensor by Greenteg. So this is a device that is used, if you don't know, for estimating core body temperature. It doesn't measure that directly, so it uses an algorithm to kind of estimate it, and I've been using the device for around about 5 months now, so getting on that half a year time point, and got some thoughts about the device, and so I'll share these in it, see if people think that they'd also want to invest in the device, or if it's not worth it for them, as I think it's quite a specific use case for the people that would want to be getting this device and using it. And it's definitely still a beta product. Like it's not a foolproof device that's fully finished. So need to be aware of that for anyone potentially looking at getting one.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I've been using the device for around 5 months now. 6 months, not super accurate. So I got the device in May, and I've kind of finished my season in September, at the end of September. So definitely a good 5 months of use and using it consistently throughout that period, and getting a good idea of where it's useful and some of the pitfalls with the devices. As like I say, it's not perfect, but definitely has its use cases. So we'll find out what those are really. So yeah, it's the sensor is becoming very widely used at the moment. It's a very hot topic, I'd say, with like lots of a large amount of World Tour teams actually being sponsored by Core, and even the teams that aren't sponsored by Core, either all the athletes or some of the athletes specifically are going out and getting the devices and using that to monitor their core body temperature. So yeah, heat training, cooling protocols are becoming a really big thing in the pro peloton at the moment, have been for the last 5 years or so. It's kind of it's kind of coming out of the woodwork now, of like, this is a thing that kind of teams are really focusing on. And I think one of the things that really brought it to light, and guys who really used the core sensor to the great effect, was Dan Bigham, and then subsequently Filippo Ganna in the breaking of the world hour records, doing those hour records in the velodrome. He really cranked up the temperature in there, so they needed to be able to perform in the heat, which meant doing heat specific training to be well heat adapted, but then also during their warm-up protocols they were making sure they were staying as cool as possible. So it's kind of like stretching both ends of the scale, like being able to perform at high temperatures, also developing a warm-up protocol that keeps your core body temperature cool as possible, so limits the onset of heat, as you're not going to start your effort and 5 minutes in your core body temperature through the roof. You're going to delay that increase in core body temperature, so it takes you longer to get to a higher core body temperature, and then also you can perform better at that higher temperature, which basically results in high performance, which is why they were focusing on it. And they're both eating their slushy in this photo, just from the Ineos videos that were produced. But yeah, like I said, a lot of World Tour teams are sponsored, but even teams like UAE Team Emirates, they're not actually sponsored by the core sensor. But you can see Pogacar's been using the device when he was doing the World Champs. You could see him wearing it under his skin suit, and also on YouTube, Christian Blumenfeld, like he's done. They work very closely with the core team, and they're doing big tests in the lab with. He's wearing like 10 different core sensors all over the body. It shows that a lot of camps are invested in this technology, and think it's a valuable thing to be focusing on. And yeah, I think that definitely could be the case. And at the moment, like I said, as I mentioned before, it is very much a beta product. It's not a totally finished thing where it's foolproof. But it is a newer technology, so I guess it's kind of to be expected. But at £230, like compared to like what you're paying for a power meter, I wouldn't class this as like as valuable as a power meter. But it's cheaper than your typical power meter. You might be able to get a £200 power meter second hand. But yeah, it's not like an £800 product. It's not ridiculously expensive. I only think that £230 is value for money if you're really using the core sensor if you're really focused on specific heat training and cooling protocols and monitoring that, then maybe the core sensor has its place. But if you're not focused on that sort of thing, then yeah, it's not really as valuable. So that would be for you to decide if it's value for money, really. I guess I'll kind of explain how you use the core sensor. So before starting an activity, you'll shake it, and a green light will start flashing. I just have mine on my heart rate monitor strap. So I have the heart rate monitor strap around my chest, and just put the core body temperature kind of under my armpit, just in front of my armpit really. And it will record data. I think it records about it can record for around 24 hours, after which time you'll need to be backing it up to the app. So if you're using this every day, just after finishing your activity, you just turn on your Bluetooth, shake the device, make sure it's connected to the app, and then it will back up your data. If you're let's say if you're going out for a ride and you've got it connected to your Wahoo, you can see your core body temperature during that activity, and it will be backed up to the Wahoo app. But it doesn't back up in the same way. So regardless of if you're recording it on your Garmin, your Wahoo, your Hammerhead, whoever uses that, you want to back it up as well to the app after the activity, just so you've got like the fullest set of data, I'd say. And yeah, you can navigate the app to have your calendar with all your past activities. So I've had it where I've tried to kind of record back up 2 days worth of data, and I think it lost a day. So I'd say best course of action is just to back it up every day to ensure that isn't the case. But yeah, they updated the app, the user interface quite recently. So I think it was around July. Brought in this new UI with this new heat adaptation score and heat training load. They didn't have that before. They used a different metric. I was starting to get the hang of the previous metric, and then they brought in this new one. It's like, all right, but this is quite user friendly, where it's actually giving a score of how well heat adapted you are. I don't think it's flawless. I've had some issues with it, but it's kind of nice to have a metric rather than having to come up with a system of tracking it itself. As I was looking into tracking my time in heat zones to try and ascertain if I was progressively overloading my time in heat zones, and because of some of the flaws with this heat adaptation score, I might want to go back to doing that sort of thing. But it's nice that they have this thing up front in the app where it's giving you a score of how well heat adapted you are, and I have got to 100% before. But yeah, overall the app is very easy to navigate, very modern, sleek. And it works well. Like you can connect to the core temperature sensor pretty easily. And this is kind of the home page, and from here you can navigate to different places. So by clicking on, I think it's the heat strain, you get this more detailed graph, and you can look at this in more detail as well. But it's also telling you time in your heat zones, and like I said, it's got this calendar where you can navigate all the way back through it, which is really good. So for this activity that I pulled up for the screenshot, this is just from my national 10-mile TT. So obviously it was a short event, but you're still getting to really high core body temperature, so 39.5 degrees C. Now, if you have Training Peaks Premium, I think you can see core body temperature in those chromatograms, but for me, I'm a free user, so I don't actually see the core body temperature data. But I don't think it's the same as Power, where you need to look at it as religiously as. I've got a method of using the device at the moment, and I might want to change that. But yeah, the app at the moment is sufficient for doing that, where I can go back to my activities, see what was the max temperature I got to. The timing zones, I'm not as stressed about that, as it is sometimes there's a delay on set. Yeah, like I said, you can look at these graphs in a lot more detail. So if you click on it and it goes full screen, and you can change the time points you're looking at to extend this scale on the x-axis here to look at a great. So this was the 1 hour time scale. This is a 20-minute time scale. So this is during the actual event. So you see my heart rate. You pair it to your heart rate monitor, and so this is the actual event itself, and green is the core body temperature. So for the actual event itself being a 20-minute event, it's a lot shorter here. But then if you're looking to like include what happened to my core body temperature during the warm up as well, you go on this larger scale and get that more holistic view. And this graph, it does show you to 0.01 degrees C with the core temperature that it's estimating. Now I don't, based off how it actually calculates core temperature, I don't like. Yes, it gives you that degree of accuracy, but I wouldn't trust it to that degree of accuracy really. But when I'm actually on my Wahoo, it's only to 0.1 degrees C, and I think that's a lot more used. Well, it's nice. It's nice to have this in the app. It's like great. That's what you're calculating the data to say. But being realistic, you can't have that degree of accuracy based off the algorithm that they're using really. And so on the Wahoo, when I'm actually competing and doing my races, seeing it to zero point 0.1 degrees C is absolutely fine. Kind of better really. In the background, these bars are showing the heat zone. So we've got the heat zones here. So they've changed it in the latest thing. So heat zone 1, 2, 3. Which you can change like your typical power training zones. You can adjust them as required. I've even after doing a ramp test, I look pretty. I think there's nothing atypical about my values, so I've just left them at the default, to be honest. So heat zone 3, for example, this orange one's probably 39.5 to 40 degrees. The yellow zone 38.5 to 39, and then green being anything below 38.5, but based on how high, 38.5 is actually quite high. So depending on how high it is, it will actually account for if that's giving heat strain based off this value, which is used to calculate your heat adaptation score. So it does take it all into account, even though the green doesn't. You think, the green's no heat training at all, but you could be in green for a ride, and that's actually a decent amount of heat stimulus. Like I said, I'm not too crazy about the algorithm. Like I don't treat this device as gospel of that's what my core temperature is. And in an ideal world, it would be like, okay, it doesn't matter if it's not reading exactly what my core temperature is, as long as it's accurate to itself, then it does its job perfectly. It's like a power meter that reads inaccurately. If that's your only power meter and that's the only thing you train to, then the fact that it reads 10% lower than what it should do shouldn't really matter, because you adjust your zones accordingly. And I think that's kind of should be the same with the core. You'd like to think it's accurate to itself, but with it being inaccurate to the baseline that it's going for, you'd think maybe it's not perfect. So yeah, as I mentioned, it measures heat transfer, and it also records skin temperature. And once you combine that with your heart rate monitor, for the second algorithm, the intensive endurance sports algorithm, which is the one you'll be using most of the time, especially when cycling. The article that they produce on the Greenteg website, so they're comparing it to an ear thermometer. So I guess that's comparing it to another non-invasive device. I guess someone could develop a core temperature device that is just a continuous ear monitor, but for cycling, I don't think that would work very well. Comparing it to the only other non-invasive device out there, it kind of tends to perform better. But comparing it to the standard, more reliable device, so comparing the core to an ingestible radio pill or a rectal thermometer with the ear thermometer, like they're both a ways off from being perfect. And like I said, that like it's not ideal. You'd ideally have it be spot on, but so long as it's accurate to itself, that it's the same as a power meter that's reading wrong. But from this data, and there's nothing on the website about how accurate it is to itself and reliable. You'd like to think it's good, and maybe it'll improve over time. That's probably the main thing that would be an improvement. Just this device being rock solid, that it's always hitting the mark, being consistent day to day, which is something I really haven't seen, to be honest. But once they can get to that level, like the fact that it's not reading the absolute right value doesn't matter, so long as it's accurate to itself. So yeah, like there's two algorithms. So there's the everyday living algorithm and the intensive sports algorithm, and this depends if you've paired up to your separate heart rate monitor or not. So when you're not so this is for like limited fluctuations in core body temperature, where you're tracking if you're ill or not. You don't want to be connected to the heart rate monitor, as it's going to be more accurate that way. But for most cases, it's going to be this sports algorithm where you want to be connected to the heart rate monitor, as it's really relies on that to for the algorithm to work properly. As here it talks about kind of the lag from seeing a change in core body temperature after it takes a while for that heat transfer to be picked up by the core sensor. So they use the heart rate to kind of understand that the core body temperature is going to see a rise sooner than it does. So it's kind of like more guessing with the algorithm once you move to this intensive sports algorithm. But if they didn't do that, then there would just be you do your 20-minute time trial, and then only after the time trial you'd see a jump in core body temperature, which would be accurate based on what the core sensor is actually reading. But it wouldn't be useful at all during the event, because you'd just see it as, oh, I'm at 37 degrees when you've just finished the event, when likely you have actually reached a far higher core body temperature. So yes, it's making some more assumptions and it's kind of extrapolating more, I'd say, but to give an accurate value, that's kind of what it needs to do. But it does like show that if it's doing this, if it's really extrapolating to this extent, you'd think, okay, how reliable is it going to be at doing this extrapolation? Is it going to be hitting the same marks consistently? And I don't know about that, because it's been pretty reliable and consistent with itself, but I have had issues, and a lot of in this article, of course, they say that a lot of the issues come from the heart rate monitor that it's paired to. So kind of the core sensor pairs to the heart rate monitor, and then on board the device it runs the algorithm, then it sends that data to your Wahoo or whatever, and it brings up all the issues it says is to do with the heart rate monitors. Oh, it's a heart rate monitor dropping out. It's kind of a get out of jail free card. It's like, oh, any issues with the core sensor, oh, it's definitely to do with the heart rate monitor, rather than like, I'm not saying the device is total shit, but it's like they have this get out of jail free card where they can just blame the heart rate monitor, really. And I use a pretty cheap heart rate monitor. It's like a Q-Spoo one from Amazon, but I don't see any dropouts really, and I have had issues with the core sensor, and maybe those were caused purely by the heart rate monitor, but I think partly it being the device being a beta product as well. Once where the heart rate monitor completely disconnected from the core sensor, so my core, I'd started my warm up and my core temperature was just going absolutely through the roof, and I think that's because I was stuck on this everyday living algorithm, just because the heart rate monitor disconnected, and therefore it wasn't able to do the intensive sports algorithm, as it didn't have any heart rate data to. And you wouldn't know that had happened unless you were in tune with seeing that core, the data it was giving was wrong. I was just like, I'm way too cool during my warm up here for this core body temperature to be accurate. And it was only then when I went into the app and I'm like, okay, it's become disconnected, because I was still getting heart rate on my Wahoo, because it's taking that heart rate from your heart rate monitor is going directly to your Wahoo. The heart rate from the core sensor is different. It's the heart rate going to the core, and then the core going to the Wahoo. The Wahoo just being my cycling computer of choice. But you wouldn't have any way to recognize that the heart rate had dropped out from the core sensor unless you go into the app. And it was only when I saw that I was getting these ridiculously high core body temperature values that I'm like, okay, something's wrong here. I'll go into the app, and then I recognised that the heart rate monitor had dropped out. Yeah, that's a limitation, but that like I said, that could have. Yes, they're saying it's always to do with the heart rate, basically, as they kind of would say that, wouldn't they? But yeah, that could have been an issue. I do use a cheap heart rate monitor, but it's pretty reliable, to be honest. I don't think you need to get a Polar H10. I've had a Polar H10 before, and that died on me. And kind of this cheaper one from Amazon has worked out just as well, and survived just as long, I'd say. So yeah, I don't think any heart rate monitor is perfect, because, like I said, Polar H10 is meant to be the best on the market, and I've had that one die. So yeah. Said in terms of a non-invasive wearable, like your rectal thermometer, that's probably going to be your most accurate if you're going to do a proper like when Christian Blumenfeld's in the lab, they're comparing what the core sensors are saying to what they're getting from the rectal thermometer. But in a real world scenario when you're training and racing, you're not going to be using an invasive device. Therefore, like a non-invasive device like the core temperature sensor is going to be the way to go. And even though it's not perfect with how it's really having to extrapolate data to give you a value, we don't know the inner workings of that algorithm, and it will be getting better over time. The more data they get, the more they can feed into this algorithm, and it could become super accurate over time. And I think it probably already is quite accurate, but we don't know the inner workings of it, and there could be flaws in it that have caused my issues that I've seen over the past 5 months. Like I say, I think it has a specific use case of someone who really wants to focus on heat training and developing like cooling protocols, so making sure that when they're doing their warm up, they're staying under control and not getting too hot. And I think that would mainly be for a time trialist, as like road races being a lot longer, you're kind of at the mercy of the race, whereas time trialing, especially a shorter time trial, you're able to control the factors a lot more, as you know that during a 20-minute or a 50-minute time trial, if you stick to your placing pattern, you're not going to blow up in terms of core temperature. Or if you're not too concerned about those sort of things, I don't think the device is worthwhile, because you're going to get this data out and you'll be like, oh, interesting, but there's not going to be much more to it. You're not going to be looking at for specific heat zones to be hitting. So, for example, I have a really good idea of what temperature I hit during my warm up. So then, when I'm doing my warm up, I'm making sure that I'm not overdoing it. I'm making sure that I'm staying below my 38.5 degrees C at a maximum, like 38.2, 38.3 is typically what I'd want to see at the end of a warm up. And if I'm going higher than that, I feel like I'm overcooking it. And then for doing heat specific sessions to get better heat adapted, like you can do that without the device, but using the device, you've got some data to at least gauge off. I might change this in the future, where I more religiously like track my time in heat zones. But at the moment, I kind of just use it as a gauge, as to use it alongside every other variable. So comparing it to my heart rate and my power, to get a more holistic approach of how my body's responding to the session, and so I kind of know, depending on the conditions and how hard the effort is, like where my core body temperature should be lying, and then I'll look at the core temperature to see, is it in line with that, and that's how I've got this intuition for when I've had a session and it's not recorded properly, and I'm like, okay, it should have been higher than that, and that's because based off me looking at the other metrics of my heart rate, my power, and how warm it was that day, and like the humidity and stuff like that, I'm like, okay, that was a really hard session, but then I'll back it up to the app, and this heat training load will be much lower than I'd expect it to be, for example. So that's an issue I've had with the device, and the device could be accurate that day. Like I could have just had a session where my heat control was really good, and I just wasn't overheating as much as possible, but I think my intuition of that session being stronger than it was, and it not coming through as much heat load and I've had the opposite before as well, where I get back from a ride and I think that was completely normal, and then it really kind of overestimates the heat training load, and that could be accurate. Like the core thing, it's really not as intuitive as core body, as heart rate and power, I'd say, where you can have a session where you think one thing and the data says something completely different, and I have got ill a couple of times from heat training. Heat training really contributed to that, and I think part of that is because the symptoms of getting ill from overdoing this training aren't as obvious as it is for if your power and your heart rate. If you're completely smashing it way too hard in the session, your power's too high, or like you're getting ill and you're not able to get to as high a heart rate as normal for a given session. I've also had this issue a couple of times where it goes into this bug state where it kind of completely stops recording data. It stops. So you go to is it's a very simple device. Like all you can do is shake it to get this green light to come on. There's no buttons or anything. But it goes into this bug state where the green light just doesn't come on, and so it's not recording any data. And I had that when it happened the first time. It was stuck like this for a week, where it wasn't turning back on at all, and I kind of had to like drain the battery and then recharge it and then factory reset it. So that wasn't ideal, but that's happened one time before, and it thankfully hasn't happened since. But I have had it a couple of times where it goes into a bugged state, but thankfully I'm able to just factory reset it by you take the charging cable and you rub it on the back to go past these magnetic sensors inside the device to factory reset it. But I've had that happen during sessions where it stops recording data, it goes into this bugged state, and then after factory resetting it, it gets rid of all the data anyway. So you've lost the data from that session. So which hasn't been a major issue because it's only happened a couple of times, but it's really not ideal. Really, it just randomly stops recording. I'll just be doing my session. I might that date is wrong. I should be up at 38.5 by now. And then I keep going with the session, and then I might give it a shake on my chest strap, and then it's not showing me the green light, and I'm like, okay, it's gone into this bugged state. This isn't going to avoid this, but you want to make sure you back up daily to the app to make sure you're like retaining your data, as like doing something like trying to record 2 days on might cause it to be more likely to go into a bug state where it's trying to hold on to it kind of runs out of internal memory. I don't know. When I was in contact with the core team for my first issue, they never gave an explanation as to what could have caused it to go into the bug state. But knowing that it only really records 24 hours worth of data, maybe if you try and record 2 sessions and then back up to the app, it's going to panic when it hits maximum memory. But if you're recording on your Wahoo or your Garmin, like it's going to record up until the time it goes into the bug state, it's going to be recording data, and then you're at least going to have it from that, so you don't need to worry about backing up to the app. But if you want to look into it in more detail, then the app is the way to go. I mentioned before about how when my heart rate monitor disconnected, it went into the wrong algorithm and just gave some completely wrong values, and I'm wondering if I think that's only happened once before, because I've only noticed it disconnected from my heart rate monitor once before. But maybe I have had unreliable values before where I don't necessarily think it went into the wrong algorithm. It was kind of the major issues is where I'd be doing a really warm session inside where I'm completely sweating my balls off, and my core body temperature is just not rising. I'm like, okay, it's just not recording data. I don't know if that's the contact with the skin. I don't know the best place to put it. Like I say, I put it under my armpit, but there's other places. You see when Christian Blumenfeld's doing a session, he's got like this core sensor in 50 different places. Poggy has it like on his back, just round the corner from his armpit. So maybe that's a slightly better place where you're getting like more permanent skin contact. As if you're moving a little bit and then the bones are interacting with it, then it's, I don't know. I feel like that should be, if that's a major issue, they should flag that up on the app and on the home page as that's the specific places you need to put the device for it to work properly. But yeah, I haven't seen anything from that. But it is an evolving device. It's a beta product where they're constantly tweaking the algorithm and updating the app. So maybe it'll be the case that okay, these are the places you need to put the device to get really reliable values. Now that we've got even more data, even though the device has been out for a couple of years, like I think it's still improving. And yeah, so hopefully this issue of low heat strain session where it's this value is lower than expected, like you do a really hard session on the bike and you know it was really heat intensive because you're sweating a huge amount indoors, but then it doesn't give you much back from that, and it's not adding to your heat adaptation score. So you did a really hard heat session, but it's saying that your heat training, your overall heat effect has gone down. You know that's intuitively just wrong. And that's kind of one of the major issues I have with the app. If you're looking at getting this device, it's probably going to be because you really want to focus on the heat training. So the first being developing a heat training protocol. The second part being kind of a cooling protocol for warming up for races and keeping your core body temperature as cool as possible. And people have been doing, people haven't started doing heat training in the past 2 years when the core sensor's been out. People have been doing it for a lot longer than that, and it is possible to do it and very well without the device. But I think it's going to take some more experimentation, a lot more trial and error, where you have to figure out what works for you, and really not overdoing it with the sessions. So for me, using the device, I've got a specific heat training zone that I'm looking at getting into, and then making sure that I'm kind of staying within that zone. And when you're doing your 1 hour heat session, so a typical 1 hour heat session would be like 15 minutes at high zone 2 to get the core body temperature to a higher range, hitting that for me 38.5 degrees C, and then 45 minutes at a lower zone 2, kind of easing off the power as and when required, keeping the heart rate relatively stable. So letting the power, as you're getting hotter, the power's going to be coming off as the heart rate. If the heart rate's staying the same and your core body temperature is rising, your power should drop off. So that will mean that I'm in this sort of range of 38.5 to 39 degrees C. So I've got some specific data that I'm looking for. I'm like, okay, that's the zone I want to be in. And obviously you could hit this zone without the device, but I think you're much more likely to, especially from my experience doing it, like this doesn't feel that hard. And your core body temperature continues to rise. So you could very easily just think, oh, I'll just go at medium zone 2, and then your core body temperature gets 39.5 degrees C, which is really high. And maybe you'll be able to adapt to that, but there's a good chance that could lead to overtraining, is even using the sensor and feeling like I wasn't overdoing it, wasn't pushing it too much. I did result in having some heat illness a couple of times. So one of the times it was very weird, and it was probably a combination of some other illnesses as well. But the second time I got heat rash, and I think that was specifically from heat training. And I wasn't even doing this crazy painter suit stuff at the time. It was just outdoor sessions, outdoor TT sessions. So they were hard, hot sessions. But it was really unexpected to get heat rash and have that overtraining from the stimulus I was doing. But it just shows it's possible, and that was me being pretty diligent with understanding my heat zones and I guess during a session I'm not too I try and cool. I work on my cooling protocol to delay the onset of heat, but then during the session I'm pushing as hard as possible, and if the heat comes up, that's fine. But I am acutely aware of it during the rest of my training, where when I'm doing a zone 2 ride, even if it's warm outside, I don't want to be seeing super high values from the core body temperature. Like if I'm getting to this value, I'm like, okay, I shouldn't be here. And the day that I end up developing the heat rash, it was that zone 2 ride after my TT session where I think I overdid it. So I was just consistently at 38.3 or 38.4 degrees C, which is like just under heat training zone. But it was a warm day, and I'm like, okay, this is fine. But even that, I think that stimulus was too much. So it just shows, I think it's, obviously from my personal experience, I think it's really easy to overdo it with with the heat training side of things. And therefore, like having this device at your hand to at least give you some feedback as to how your core temperature is behaving, that is a good thing, and can be used well. But even using that, it's easy to fuck it up, I'd say. So yeah, and with these sessions, if you didn't have a sensor, you'd just be like, okay, I just need to do 3 of these sessions per week. But let's say it was an extremely warm week outside, and you did 3 additional rides outside that were also really warm. With the core if you're wearing the core sensor for all of those sessions, then you get a better understanding of the cumulative like load of the week. And if those outdoor sessions were sufficiently high heat stimulus that you don't need to bother with the indoor heat stuff, as that's just going to be too much load on top of what you're already doing, and you could develop something like getting ill, heat overtraining. This is partly just some of my ideas for training for next year to stop this from happening. But the effects of heat training are quite acute. It's a use it or lose it type thing. If you stop doing the heat training, it's gonna fall off your ability to do it, and it doesn't take that long to see the effects of the heat training. So you can get very well heat adapted within the first 2 weeks, sort of thing. However, if you are wanting to build up the heat a lot to get very well heat adapted to do the sort of thing that Dan and Filippo were doing for their world hour records, where they're doing lots of heat training in a given week, to be able to cope with that higher load, it's the same as any progressive overload. You need to build it up over time. So I think introducing the heat stuff to a lower extent earlier in the year, but that's so you're building a base of heat work that you can build from to get to higher and higher levels and more time in heat training zone, so that you're more adapted to it. So then when it is a warm week outside, you're not gonna get some heat illness the week before your big event. The other thing I've been hyping on about is the developing a cooling protocol pre-race. So especially this year, like, you see guys are wearing ice vests for pretty much every stage. Pogacar turns up to the start line of every Tour de France stage in an ice vest, it seems, as even for like a 4 or 5 hour stage. Like, cooling's important. It's extremely warm there, and even if it's 30 minutes of him staying a little bit cooler, they've decided that that's going to be beneficial for his performance. So it's not just time trials where they're trying to stay cool before a 30-minute time trial. Like, it's before, like, pretty much every stage, which is it shows that they're really taking the controlling core body temperature seriously. It also factors into the warm-up as kind of a typical warm-up. It's I think a lot of people are more likely to overdo it in their warm-up than underdo it. As I don't think you need to do a huge amount to be ready to race, and you're more likely to burn out your legs doing something that's way too difficult. So for example, my warm-up for 10 mile nationals was about 25 minutes at 150 watts. Did a 15 minutes on the rollers at 150 watts with a small spike of 20 seconds at 300 watts where I just increased the cadence. Can't get to a very high power on my warm-up rollers anyway. And then like another 10 minutes at 150 watts to the start with a couple of surges. And yeah, I'd say that's like super minimal. And that was all to do with keeping my core temperature under control. As I did that 15 minutes. So it's like, so this is my race here. So this big lump of increased heart rate, and then after that, the core body temperature only coming up at the end of it after I'd finished the race. But then here, this area here where you're seeing the yellow heat training zones, that was during my warm up here. That's right into the start. BC, it was my core body temperature was rising doing that 150 watts, 15 minutes at 150 watts, and if I was cold, it was a different day. I might have done some more surges. I always keep it pretty minimal, to be honest. But I noticed that my core body temperature was already rising to getting close to 38.5, which is like higher than a normal warm up. And it's like, okay, I'm not doing anything more here is not gonna do me any good, really, because I'm already hotter than I kind of want to be. So yeah, it was just like, okay, keep it as basic as possible. I'm just spinning the legs out here, and then I'll go to the start. And yeah, like I had a cooling protocol in place where I'd wear an ice vest, not as nice as the one that the pros have, but ice vest. I'm drinking ice water along with sugar water, and then before I headed to the start, I had some bottles of ice water that I doused my legs with, and I also like unzipped my skin suit, so I had my chest out, just riding to the start, so the wind would be able to hit me. And it was only when I was getting ready at the start line did I zip up my skin suit ready to go. And yeah, I'm also used to doing a more minimal warm-up in training, as I know that for races I don't want to be doing a huge amount, so I want my body to kind of learn to be being activated off a more minimal warm-up. So my typical warm-up, I do like a couple of surges, like 10 surges, just getting on top of the gear a few times, and then like a very small ramp of like 4.5 minutes, 3.5 minutes, and then I do a couple of sprints, and that's pretty much it. Whereas a lot of people will do like some quite crazy warm-ups, in my opinion, compared to what minimal. But maybe that's because I'm young, that I can get away with doing a more minimal warm-up. But when I'm kind of before most, like I mentioned how minimal this warm-up was before the 10 mile nationals, but to be honest, most races I'll just spin out on the rollers for a little bit and make sure the legs are working, and so long as the core body temperature's not getting too high and I feel all right, then yeah, I feel like I'm good to go. at least with the sensor, like it just gives you that feedback as to okay, ease it back here. You may be doing too much for your warm up. You're gonna get your risk of overheating here, where it's not overheating. You're not gonna blow up during your warm up. You're not gonna hit 40 degrees C. Well, if you hit 40 degrees C during your warm up, you completely messed it up. It's not even about hitting way too high a value during the warm up. It's like you might not think hitting. So let's say I got to 38.5 degrees C during my warm up, and the average person might get to 39 degrees C. Is there anything wrong with 39 degrees C? No, you've not blown up. But if you already hit 39 degrees C before you start your actual race, like first of all, it's going to take longer to come down to a more a standard 38.0 degrees C, and if you've already reached that temperature before, you might hit it again at a faster again, like you rebound to it faster. So yeah, it's not about like blowing up during your warm up. It's about delaying the onset of getting to a higher temperature during your actual performance, and actually having the best performance you can, really. As that's why Dan and Filippo were so focused on the core set stuff, because it's kind of directly related with your performance. Like as you hit after hitting certain value, you're absolutely fucked and you just can't produce the power. So you want to make sure that doesn't happen and delay it from happening as much as possible. I definitely think it's still a beta product. It has some teething issues. It's not perfect, but they are probably improving it day to day. And the algorithm they use, they get more data behind it, and it's probably going to improve. But yeah, it's not a finalized product, and unlike a power meter, where a power meter is directly recording a variable, it's taking your cadence and your torque, and it's using that to calculate your power. It's directly measuring something, whereas this core sensor is measuring heat transfer and skin temperature, combining that with a separate device of your heart rate monitor, and then plugging that into an algorithm to try and estimate your core temperature. It's not directly measuring your core temperature, so it's a different device, and because of how it's trying to record a variable, like it's not going to be perfect. Like this algorithm is never going to be, well, it might be. AI is going crazy, but it's never going to be directly recording a variable in the same way a power meter or a heart rate monitor does. So it's never going to be the same like that, but it is a quite new technology. So there is room for improvement with it, and you don't need to be an early adopter. Like I think it has a specific use case of someone who really wants to focus on the heat training side of things. But other than that, I don't see it being very useful for like the general consumer. Whereas I feel like anyone can get value from a heart rate monitor or a power meter, and look at their efforts and see that instant response of, oh, I got to 170 BPM. Oh, I hit 400 watts for that hill climb that I did. Whereas the core stuff, it needs more user input to get meaningful data, as a typical person would go out for their ride and their core temperature just fluctuates a little bit, and it's up and down. It's 38.5 for most of the ride, and it's like, okay, great. What does that actually mean? It's the use case, I think, is someone who really wants to seek the benefits of core training, of heat training, which definitely do exist. There's a reason why the pros are really focused on it in the moment, and have been for the past few years. So if you want to be doing that sort of thing, the core sensor could be quite useful for you, as it's giving you some feedback rather than just the intuition you have in your head. Additionally, heat training really isn't as intuitive as you might think. Like you'd think, I'd have a good intuition for it. Based on what I get from the data, it's really not the case, where it's not the same as power and heart rate, where it behaves like you'd expect it to. Just based on I'm talking about the times I got ill, where I really wouldn't have expected to get ill, as I didn't think I was going too crazy with the heat training. And looking back in hindsight, I'm thinking, okay, maybe I did. But during the time, there was no real evidence from the data to say that was the case. So yeah, having the device in your back pocket as giving you some additional data that can help you anticipate when you're maybe overdoing it and then ease off the gas. Whereas if you're doing that more blindly and just doing it without the sensor, I could see it being a lot easier to overdo it. You can do this heat training without the sensor, but from my experience with getting ill this year, like I think I want to keep using the core sensor and be more diligent with looking at the data. And yeah, it is £230. Like it's not cheap compared to other things in cycling. Like maybe it's not that bad. Like that's probably the same price you'd pay for a second-hand power meter. I don't think it's as good as a power meter and the same as a power meter, but combined with a power meter and focused on the heat training, like it can be could be a valuable asset. But yeah, it just depends who you are really. And I've already outlined the use case of who I think could be using it. And I did notice that it was 20% off last Black Friday. I paid full price for mine back in May 2024, so I didn't get this 20% off, but they might be doing that in a couple of months' time with the Black Friday for 2024. So look out for that if you're interested in doing some heat training and think the core sensor is going to be useful for you. As I think for me, I'm really wanting to focus on my heat training going forward and using the core sensor. And maybe the next year is going to be super valuable, where I kind of get a really good understanding of how my body behaves to heat training, and then after you've got that understanding of how your body behaves, the core sensor is just there in the background as it's recording data, but you build that better intuition for how your body responds to heat training based off like using the core sensor over time. It's the same as I kind of feel the same with a power meter, where I can probably do a time trial without a power meter. But part of that comes from training to power for a decent amount of time, and okay, you get good at training to power, and then you kind of get a better intuition for what that power feels like. And maybe it's the same with the core sensor, where you use the data from the core sensor to get an understanding of how your core body temperature behaves, and then if it stops working or you stop using it or whatever, then you still have like a good intuition for that side of things.